I need someone to show me my place in all this.
I think this is the line that best resembles who Rey is and what she struggles with throughout The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. At its core, the sequel trilogy is about a new generation of characters living in the shadow of the generation that came before. Finn was a stormtrooper for an organization that was trying to rebuild the once glorious empire. Ben Solo is the son of two of the most important people in the galaxy. Rey, however, is just an orphan who in the matter of a few days is thrust into the role of being one of the most important people in the galaxy. While later on it is revealed that she's the granddaughter of the late great Emperor Palpatine, she begins the story as just some ordinary young woman. Rey's introduction in the first act of The Force Awakens lasts exactly 6 minutes, and even someone who had never seen a single second of Star Wars would still be able to resonate with all the emotional beats. We see Rey trek across the desert alone. We see Rey clean and sell mechanical parts alone. We see Rey eat food in her home alone. And it's not until 4 minutes and 23 seconds into the scene that Rey speaks her first words. Up until this point, any audience member knows that Rey feels alone. The audience can empathize with that feeling of working every day just to get some food on the table for it all to just mean nothing. She's an orphan who appears to have grown up on this planet by herself, which is confirmed later on in the movie. No parents and no family. Much of the criticism thrown towards the character of Rey is that she's a character with no flaws, or that her flaws don't impact her in a negative way, especially compared to her protagonist counterparts in Anakin and Luke. In this video, I hope to dispel this fiction because Rey is truly one of the most psychologically damaged characters in Star Wars. Going back to Rey's introduction scene, there is something established here for Rey that differs greatly from both Luke and Anakin, and it is potentially the most important factor for the emotional stability of any child, and that is her lack of parents or parental figures. While Luke didn't grow up with his parents, he did grow up in a two-parent household with Owen and Beru. Anakin had a loving and caring mother to watch over him. Rey had two loving parents up until the age of 5, but after that she seems to have been on her own up until the present day Force Awakens. She may have had mentors like Unkar Plutt, but he was by no means a father figure to her. I think fans who claim that Rey has no flaws don't understand the importance of growing up in a 2 or even a 1-parent household. I'm gonna be referencing many studies done on orphans and adopted children, and in those studies are common psychological effects that are found in many children. I'm not here to say that all orphans or adopted children suffer from these potential side effects. My mother grew up in a mostly single-parent household, and she's one of the strongest people I know. The point of referencing these studies is to compare Rey to a lot of common psychological effects found in these children. Again, not all orphans or adopted children, but a lot of them. Many of these studies have concluded that having two parents in a child's life is important, as they both play a distinct and important role in the psychological and emotional development of a child. On average, children raised by a single mother are more likely to fare worse on a number of dimensions, including their school achievement and their social and emotional development. This could partially explain the emotional insecurities that Anakin possesses. Rey didn't even have the luxury of one parent. She grew up an orphan, basically. Not only that, but given the nature of Jakku, it can be implied that she grew up in an abusive environment. According to the published paper, The Psychological Stability of Orphans in Crisis Situations, it was concluded that the majority of orphans who survived abuse develop psychological instability to difficult crisis situations that causes negative structural changes in the main components of self-concept, cognitive, behavioral, emotional, presentational, and leads to the formation of orphans' protective coping strategies of stress coping behavior. We see these traits of Rey struggling in stressful situations strongly on display throughout The Rise of Skywalker. Rey goes through a great deal of stress during that movie, and for the most part handles it terribly. She shot lightning from her her fingers. She put all of her friends at risk by going to speak to Kylo Ren. She ran away from her friends to go to the Death Star. She gave into the dark side while fighting Kylo, and eventually gives into the stress by running away in an attempt to exile herself because of her poor self-concept. Kylo Ren even points this out to Rey when he says, "Look at yourself, you wanted to prove to my mother that you were a Jedi, but instead you've proven something else. You can't go back to her now." Furthermore, it was stated by a Harvard paper that if parents are unresponsive, inconsistent, or abusive, children may develop a fearful or insecure form of attachment. They also have more trouble soothing or calming themselves when they are frustrated, angry, or anxious. One result of this pattern of development is dependent personality disorder. I know this doesn't necessarily describe what Rey grew up with, but she did have unresponsive parents and did grow up in an abusive environment. Again, we see many times Rey struggling to calm herself down when she is severely stressed. But what I want to focus on here is the development of dependent personality disorder. I don't think Rey completely fits the description with someone diagnosed with DPD or dependent personality disorder, but she does share a few of those traits. Healthline.com defines DPD as an anxious personality disorder characterized by an inability to be alone. Again, I would not say that this is an accurate description of Rey, but if we do look at some of the symptoms of DPD, a few do match the description of Rey, including needing repeated reassurance, being easily hurt by disapproval, fearing rejection, having a tendency to be naive, and fearing abandonment. Throughout the sequel trilogy, Rey needs repeated reassurance from at first Han, then Luke, then Ben, then Leia, then all the Jedi, and at the end of the Rise of Skywalker, she can finally rely on herself. When Luke appears to disapprove of Rey and disappoints her, she flocks to Ben Solo for that feeling of approval, that feeling that someone can help her. In the Rise of Skywalker, one reason I see Rey exiling herself on Ahch-To is because she potentially fears being rejected by Leia and the rest of the Jedi that came before her. Rey is easily one of the most naive characters in Star Wars. Just watch my whole Mary Sue video if you want more details on that. And fear of abandonment is a very common trait found amongst orphans or adopted children. So while I would not diagnose Rey with DPD, it is clear that Rey does have some dependency issues throughout the movies, especially in The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker. Just look at the way she interacts with Han Solo in The Force Awakens. Rey basically looks to him like a father figure. She tries to impress him on numerous occasions and is devastated by his death even though she just met him a few hours ago. Kylo Ren even points this out to Rey during the interrogation scene.
Han Solo, I feel like he's the father you never had.
When Rey was talking to Maz at the castle, Maz tells her there is someone who can help her, but she puts her hopes into Luke rather realizing she can help herself. The evidence is clear that Rey has some dependency problems. Not only is it clear that Rey has these problems, but these problems affect the decisions she makes in the movies in a negative way, mostly in The Rise of Skywalker. But I want to transition into a study conducted by the International Journal of Environmental and Science Education titled Psychological Characteristics of Adolescent Orphans with Different Experience of Living in a Family. In this study, there are 3 groups of orphans taken. For this video, we are going to look at Group 1, which is described as adolescents without any experience of living with a family. This is the closest group to what Rey has experienced. According to the paper, adolescents in Group 1 feel a lack of warmth, helplessness, dependence, defectiveness, loneliness, and insecurity. They rarely show feminine features, but more frequently experience fear, anxiety, oppression, internal stress, and a fear of rejection, in comparison with other groups. Group 1 demonstrated the highest degree of hostility and aggressiveness and strong sense of guilt. Of what was described in Group 1, this for the most part aligns with Rey really nicely. One aspect of this I find interesting is the rarity of feminine features. Rey is shown many times throughout the movies to be aggressive, wanting to fight, and emotionally distancing herself from her friends. These are typically masculine traits which are possessed by Rey. While I wouldn't say Rey feels helplessness or defectiveness, she does feel a lack of warmth, dependence, loneliness, and insecurity. Growing up with no real friends or family is something that would definitely make you feel lonely. Even during the events of The Last Jedi, Rey tells Kylo how she has never felt so alone.
I'd never felt so alone.
When people are lonely, they may often try to find companionship in bad places. In this case, it was with Kylo Ren, someone who is clearly trying to manipulate her. Going back to Rey's introduction, there's a neat detail that many people may not have noticed. When Rey is looking to the old woman, she turns her head to the side, but in the next shot of her, she's looking out straight ahead, with the scene implying she is still looking at the old woman. In reality, there was a clip cut out, but thankfully it was still in the novelization of The Force Awakens. Rey was actually looking ahead at a mother and son bonding together, and the mother showing affection towards her son. This caught Rey's attention because this was the affection that she wishes she had. Had this scene actually been in the movie, I think it would have added to the sense of Rey feeling alone, and it would make more sense why. It would also give us that sense that Rey is searching for a parental figure, which makes her relationships with Han, Luke, and Leia make much more sense. As I stated earlier, it is clear that Rey is dependent on others, so I don't really need to get deeper into that. The study I mentioned before goes on to say how Group 1 also expresses the most negative attitude towards their own future, compared to the results of the control groups, and that they do not have personal value. This is best exemplified in the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker, when Rey hands Leia back the Skywalker saber. Rey says that she hopes she will be worthy of the saber one day, implying that she isn't too optimistic about her future as a Jedi, and that she does not value herself enough to wield it at the moment. This is perfectly in line with the test subjects from Group 1 of the study. The reason I want to bring this study up is because I feel people completely undermine her backstory established in The Force Awakens and the effects of growing up on Jakku most likely had on Rey. Rey consistently shows the traumas of growing up as an orphan and how her psychological traits match those described by numerous studies. Most of this video has been talking about the effects of being an orphan, but by the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker, she's basically an adopted daughter of Leia. While there are many studies done on orphans, there are also plenty of studies done on adopted adolescent children and some of the struggles they go through. Remember, during the events of The Rise of Skywalker, Rey is only 20 years old. So while she would be legally an adult by American standards, she is only a few years removed from adolescence. And as you will see in a second, what these studies conclude are very similar to the struggles Rey goes through in The Rise of Skywalker. According to CenterForAnxietyDisorders.com, there are many psychological effects that adolescent adoptees often experience, including but not limited to loss, rejection, guilt, shame, grief, identity, and intimacy. While you may be able to find many examples of these psychological effects in Rey, the one I want to focus on is identity and to a lesser extent, intimacy, because these are what Rey seems to struggle with the most in The Rise of Skywalker. The Rise of Skywalker begins and Rey seems to have moved on from her parents abandoning her. However, she is struggling to connect with the Jedi before her. She fails to complete the training course and hands Leia back the lightsaber because she doesn't feel worthy enough of being the heir to the Jedi. If you were to look at things from her perspective, this makes perfect sense. She went from one day being a scavenger to being accidentally thrown into the middle of the next galactic conflict. She never asked to be a Jedi, and she never even really wanted to. She just wanted to find belonging. Throughout the movie, we see Rey progressively push her friends to the side in the quest to destroy Palpatine. She struggles to tell Finn about her vision with the Sith throne, and she straight up ignores him on the ocean moon of Endor. According to the article on CenterForAnxietyDisorders.com, intimacy is frequently difficult for the adopted adult because they have such deeply rooted feelings of rejection, guilt, or shame, and don't truly have an identity. Often people who have gone through these negative emotions subconsciously push others away to avoid experiencing another loss. Rey's actions in The Rise of Skywalker are consistent with the psychological effects of being an adopted adolescent. We also see some guilt from Rey when hearing the truth about her parents. She probably hated her parents for the past year, but upon realizing her parents did indeed love her, she may definitely feel guilt of her previous feelings. But the most interesting line from the paper is that they don't truly have an identity. Rey believes throughout the film that she isn't worthy of being a Jedi since she harbors so much darkness from her grandfather and Palpatine. She needs to exile herself because she will harm those around her. Identity is another loss the adopted adult must face. While they have been given a new name and identity by their adoptive parents, is it who they truly are? Or are they really the person they were before the adoption? Even though Rey adopts the name Skywalker at the end of the movie, She is basically Leia's surrogate daughter, something she struggles with. The article continues, even if they fully embrace their new family, the adoptee still suffers from a loss of identity because they often know nothing about their birth family. Who are their ancestors? What do they know about inherited genetic ties or family backgrounds? This ties in perfectly into one of the most important scenes in The Rise of Skywalker. Rey is too concerned with her biological ancestors and what she gets from them. Luke reassures her that some things are stronger than blood and that her biological family does not matter. In the end, this gives Rey the confidence to fight Palpatine and destroy the Sith. The point here is, even though Rey was no longer an orphan necessarily and found an adopted family, she still suffered from many of the common insecurities found in the real world. Even after all that struggling, she concludes the trilogy by officially being adopted into the Skywalker family and taking the Skywalker name. This is the last point I want to touch on because there are still a lot of people who I don't think understand why she took the name Skywalker. Rey this whole trilogy has been an orphan or a struggling adoptee. Identity is something that she clearly struggled with throughout the trilogy. All she wanted to do was find a family and be accepted by them. In the end, Rey found the Skywalker family and was accepted by them. Her taking the name Skywalker was her finally getting everything she wanted, a family. Now, of course, you can argue that she should have taken the name Solo or Organa, but the point is she found a family. I've heard the argument of her taking the name Palpatine to be quite a good one, but one that doesn't fit the narrative of this movie. Rey's journey in this movie is about accepting that her family can be more than just your blood relatives. Her taking the name Palpatine would go against the theme of this movie, so when the story ends, Rey has found that family and has overcome many of the struggles she faced throughout the trilogy. And that is the psychology of Rey. If you want to see more videos on Rey, here is my 2-hour-long video on why Rey is not a Mary Sue, and here's a video about Rey and the Mandalorian. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video. Don't forget to unite the Flawed Squad, and I will see you guys next time.